Hey class. Okay, so this is a continuation of last week's discussion, talk, I don't know, lecture about social media marketing and how we do it. In this week's, though, we're going to be a little more finite on some of our terminology and some of the things that people face when actually doing social media marketing and product engagement in the digital space. For homework, I'll tell you towards the end, it's just a discussion because I'd really like, for the best thing possible, I'd like it if we catch up on all of the missing work or any late work or anything and give you guys a little bit of a lighter workload because I know all your other classes are probably burdening you with probably like an intense amount of work. So I want to even it out because I know as I told you earlier, I front end this course with a lot of work. And that's really to get your mindset really framed around what social media does, how it operates, and how we could be better users of it and how we could operate it better. But most importantly, how we think critically about it. And that's really important for basically the future of everything, because as we've seen Facebook testify, 100 times, it's very clear that social media platforms aren't on our side. So what it means is that we need to know how to use them more critically, so that at least knowing that they're not going to go away, we at least know how to think about them in terms of making them work better for us, since the world's changing so rapidly. But one thing we know that is never going away is marketing, social media marketing in general. And so this is in this part 2, we're going to go over a bunch of more keywords that you should know as you go forward. And this is really helpful to understand what you're being marketed, how you're being marketed, and why it's working. So first, I want to go over some of the things and what happens when you're doing social media marketing. The ways in which it works means you have to measure success. In other words, here's how it works from the top down. If you're going to advertise something, you're going to market something, it costs money. It costs money to make money. So if you're going to market something, you have to put some sort of expenditure or investment in the return on investment, what we call ROI. Return on investment is a neoliberal term, which is basically how much you put out to how much comes back. I always use it in the terms of like the hassle to cost ratio. That's the way I frame it, is how much hassle it is to the cost of what it is to all these other, it's a complicated formula that everyone comes up with of their own and then makes it work to the best availabilities of what they think is going to be their conversion rate. So that's a term that you should know. A conversion rate is basically arbitrary based on the system in which you would want it to work. For example, a conversion rate could be a closing meaning you're making a sale. So always be closing. That's if you want to close the sale, you want to make the deal, that means somebody wrote the check, hit the pay button, and so forth. But how do you convert somebody from a spectator to a consumer? That's part of a conversion rate. And the conversion rate has to be measured, otherwise it's really not important to understand how it's doing. There's two different types of campaigns, awareness campaigns and sales campaigns. Awareness campaigns are designed specifically to raise awareness, and that means a brand awareness, an engagement level that makes people understand what you're doing. There's no real sales involved, but they have to start knowing what the message is, what the downstream of everything that you've been doing. The other one is sales campaigns. You have a product and you need to get it into people's hands. So how do you do that? How do you convert somebody from somebody as a scroller to somebody who's an owner and somebody who could make that happen, cross the screen in that way? One way or another, you have to cross the screen. You have to get it from their basic passive maneuvering, passive engagement with a digital device, to somebody who's either becoming an activist, somebody who's going out into the world, which we'll talk about next week, and making some sort of change based on your specific brand, or a sale where it's something's on the side of the screen and you want them to hold it, you want them to put it somewhere, you want them to engage with it, you want them to be part of it. It depends on the product, of course. This could be everything from the ephemeral, which is like basically digital products, to the physical, which could be any number of a billion different things. This is pretty much an intro level course, so we're not getting to the crazy amounts of levels of which marketing engages with the actual distribution of the product itself. That's way bigger conversation to have, and honestly, I would love to talk about it, and I'll talk about it with anybody who really wants to, but it's really, we're in a globalized product market at this point, and it's really something to think about where things are made, why they're made there, what the cost ratio analyses are, and so on and so forth. But for this one, we're going to talk about digital, social media marketing. So we've already mentioned that conversion rates are the most important thing, and a conversion rate is what the percentage of success would be. Again, this is a number that's decided upon by you or your people around you to make sure that it's working, that it's worth the money. What that means is you have to become, if you're going to do this, an expert at metrics and analytics. Metrics and analytics are pretty much the same word, but what that is understanding the numbers that are behind everything. They come with every site. Most of you probably don't know you engage with it all the time, and you could probably take a look at your metrics and your engagement. If any of you have Twitter, you could go and basically Google engagement with Twitter or metrics in Twitter and turn on your settings. In the lower right corner of all of your tweets, from there forward, you could click it and you could actually see how many eyes, what we call impressions, have come across your tweets. Then there's engagement. Those are people that literally stopped scrolling to read. So that goes all the way from there. They stop. It detects the sense of somebody stopping the scroll, reading your tweet, and then moving on, or hitting a like, hitting a retweet, or a reply. Those are engagement settings. On Instagram, that changes, the popularity of those settings change all the time. There's 4 pieces of metrics for Instagram. There's comment, like, save, and share. And all 4 of them hold different weights. Right now, the save is the most important part of Instagram. Those people who save a post are more likely to make a conversion to a sale. And so they've changed the algorithm to prioritize people who will save the content. These are always moving targets. They're actually not easy to keep track of, and it requires a social media marketer to be very on top of the trends of what's going on behind the scenes in the black box of the algorithm. Since we don't actually know how the algorithm works or what it prioritizes or who is in charge of making those switches happen, what we have to look to is influencers. Influencers seem to be either the trendsetters or the trend makers, and so when we see them creating a style of social media marketing, it's most likely going to be adopted by the platform. I've mentioned the book several times during the semester, but if you read Sarah Fryer's No Filter, the story about Instagram, she talks about how Instagram basically learns all its lessons from the influencers, not the other way around. So an influencer designs the model, Instagram adopts it, and then creates that as part of how other influencers or users will have to engage with the platform. So there's other ways. So let's talk about the 2 different methods of conversion rate. There's something called CPM and CPC. CPM is cost per M, M being 1,000 for the symbol, Roman symbol, and those are eyes, cost per impressions, that's what they're called. How many eyes are seen on it? So sometimes you want to raise awareness about something, so you pay for a CPM campaign. How many times somebody comes across it and then starts remembering it. That's a retention thing. The other one is CPC. That's literally a close. That's making a conversion rate, cost per click. It's usually more expensive to run a CPC campaign because it requires somebody to click through to your campaign or click through to the destination in which they're going to be learning more about whatever you're doing. And that leads us to websites. Are websites even necessary anymore? Do people use websites? How many of you go across websites? Do you have a website? Well, from my advice to you, you should have a website. You should own your domain name. So I own jamesandcohen.com, and I also own many other domain names because I basically know that if those domains are going to have some sort of value, I want to have a landing page for some sort of information. The reason for a website isn't as outdated as we think, even though the internet is pretty much, like I've always said, for websites that basically share their own content. But an own personal website acts as a place for information to sit, some place for people to gain more information. But it works beyond that. There's 2 different things inside of a website you should know. One is SEO. It's an older term, but it's still used all the time. SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization, and that's something called the Alexa rankings. When you search for something, the words on your website help it get higher up in the Alexa rankings, the rankings that Google uses to see what comes up first on the first page of Google, because most people don't go to the second page of Google. So search engine optimization is writing in keywords, words that matter to an audience that you want to convert in some way or another, and you have to use the website to do that. SEO is also how clickbait works. Those are like headlines that work with keywords that make people click through to go to the article. Most of those articles are loaded with ads. The ads fund the website. And so ads are done by you clicking, and an ad is done by dropping a cookie on your machine. Ads usually drop cookies, and those cookies travel with you from site to site. And those cookies become, as we've talked about previously, the tracking device of the internet. But beyond that is you can manually add tracking devices to your own website. You could add something called a pixel. A pixel is a 1x1 GIF that's in your website that loads. And when somebody loads the website, it gives enough data about the person's IP address because an image on the web downloads locally to your machine. So you download, without knowing it, a 1 pixel file to your machine. That one pixel file is encoded with a long string of data that acts much like a cookie, but it's a little more permanent. And that permanence shows on websites, and it travels, it follows you as you go across the internet. But you could add that to your own website so you could follow people yourself. That's the same thing as Google AdWords or Google Analytics. You could add a string of JavaScript to your website at the very bottom in the code that allows you to track users, and then more importantly, the specific data that comes with a user's visit. Some of that specific data is bounce rates. A bounce rate, you shouldn't have a high number. You would want to avoid any bounce rate that's above 50%. But a bounce rate is when somebody goes from Google, clicks on your website, they go to your website. The bounce rate is how many people immediately click back. So the quicker they hit back is the quicker they bounce, and that number shouldn't be too high. You want people to stay because Google Analytics will also track time spent. How long does somebody actually spend on a site? Well, we can't see what they're actually doing. We do know if they keep the tab open. We know that if they're going to stay there a while because that data is being tracked with the Google Analytics code. Part of Google is tracking that because it helps their AdWords operate what words matter to the search engines. So all of these things are part of a big ecosystem. Larger than all these ecosystems, as you know by now, is the algorithm. So the algorithms are different for every site you come across, from the Facebook news feed to the Google search engine, to YouTube search engines, to the recommendation systems. Each of them are different, but they're driven by changing trends. And since we don't actually know how they operate because they work behind the scenes, all we could do is keep track of how they're changing. And we know that this is happening all the time because while we're watching people become more famous or marketing brands change their strategies, we know it's because these algorithms shift based on the culture and the times that are going on at the current moment. One of the things that I want you to take away from this entire thing, from social media marketing and how we interact with an audience, whether we're raising awareness or creating a campaign for sales, is that it really comes down to storytelling. Remember back to the Casey Neistat commercial, "Do What You Can't." That thing was a call to action for other people to join in on YouTube and do what they can't, which I think is a great slogan. But that slogan comes downstream from Samsung. Casey Neistat did not make that slogan. Samsung did. Samsung asked Casey Neistat to carry that, create a campaign for it, and that campaign went on for several years. But what they found is that the influencer model was better than the traditional television campaign model. There are two different commercials for it. And I'll make sure I actually share that in the Substack, so you'll see it somewhere below here. And you'll see that the two different campaigns are very, very similar, almost shot for shot, but there is one made for television and another one made for the internet. So those are thought processes. But at the end, it's about storytelling. If you can't tell a story, if you can't complete the story or include the audience member in that story, that's very hard to continue the marketing campaign. You want people to feel like it's personalized and that they can relate to that. And that's how influencers and YouTubers actually operate. Same way as memes do. It's relatable. And when you find something that's relatable, you're able to make it more like the way memes operate in the bigger scale, like a fortune cookie, something that applies to you or feels personal, but it's actually broadly expansive across many, many spaces. So it's not easy. For homework, it's fairly easy, and the opposite of that, it's a fairly easy assignment for homework. I'm going to just open up a discussion board, and the question is, what works? What have you noticed as the going trends on what is operating? So I want actually an example from you of something that worked really well, that caused you to move beyond the ad or whatever it is to its website or click on it, or something that has driven you to decide to make a purchase. I know Instagram's algorithm for me has become extremely precise, and I click through on many ads now. But tell me what it is specifically that makes you want to make that conversion. What is it that brought you to the idea that you would move one step further than the scroll? And I want you to talk about this in the discussion board because this might be varied per person. Don't obviously make this too personal, but also understand that everybody has a different way of interacting with their feed. So try to tell me, maybe we could come up with a consensus by the end of the discussion board of what is the thing that works right now. Because the algorithm is always changing, because our information systems are always being a little bit different, what is the current thing? What's actually going on? And since I'm not a marketer, I'm not going to take your information and create some sort of model of like, oh, I'm going to sell something based on your research, but I'm interested. I'm just as curious as you. What is the current thing that's working? There's also a few, if you just Google like on YouTube, or if you just YouTube, what's the current Instagram algorithm, you'll see influencers talking about what probably works now better. I don't know if you agree or disagree with any of those, or if they're outdated as soon as they post them because we move on from that. But either way, there is something that is successful out there. And I would just like to hear from you what you think is the successful model. So that's our discussion for this week. Like I said, I would love for you to catch up on the other stuff, maybe relax a little bit and not have to feel overburdened by so much, because we only have, I think, 2 or 3 more weeks left of the semester, and I want to make sure we prep for the final 2 lectures, which is really next week. We're going to talk about organization, social media organization, which is an offset of marketing in some weird way because we live in that neoliberal world. And then we're going to talk about what we could do for the final project, which is more fun than you might imagine it to be. So it'll be actually well worth your time. So until next time, stay curious and stay healthy and stay well.